Not through tears, not through glass. They stood outside, holding each other in the glow of the flames, smiling. The last thing I saw before the smoke stole my breath was Katie's hand wrapped around Stephen's arm. Marianne stood behind them, the same girl who used to braid my hair in the mornings, her face calm, unbothered, lit orange by the inferno they left me in. I screamed. I begged. My fist slammed the locked door until my skin peeled. The heat licked up the walls like it had waited its whole life for me. And when the floor gave way beneath me, I remember thinking not of death but of betrayal, because I didn't just die that night. I was discarded. They didn't call for help. They didn't look back. I died in the house I paid for, on the carpet Katie picked, beside the fireplace. Stephen bragged about building himself. It took them 3 days to file the insurance claim. They said it was an accident, that I must have left the stove on. But I remember locking it. I remember every moment of that night because the universe made sure I wouldn't forget. Because when I opened my eyes again, I was staring at the same ceiling, breathing clean air, and I realized something was wrong. The calendar said I had 365 days until the fire, 365 days to rewrite my death. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I got out of bed, walked to the mirror, and stared at the skin that had once blistered away, and I smiled. If they thought Marvin was going to die quietly again, they were wrong. This time, I would die on their terms, on paper, with contracts, and then I would burn down everything they cared about, not with fire, but with a signature, a sale, and silence. Because this time, I wouldn't wait for the flames. I'd light the match myself. Marvin had always been the quiet type, the kind of man who kept the peace by sacrificing his own. Reliable, predictable, the one who always said, "It's fine," even when it wasn't. He wasn't the loudest in the room, but he was the one who paid the rent when Katie's card declined, who walked Marianne home from parties when she was too drunk to remember her own name, who helped Stephen write the resume that got him hired in the first place. They all relied on him, smiled at him, ate from his hand like tamed birds, and Marvin mistook it for love. He met Katie at a charity dinner 3 years before the fire. She was charming in a distracted sort of way, all soft laughter and sparkling eyes, like she was always halfway out the door, but still wanted you to chase her. She'd told him he had a gentle soul, and at the time, he believed that was a compliment. They started dating after only 2 weeks. She moved in after 3. She didn't offer rent, but she decorated the bathroom with lavender-scented candles and called him Marvy when she wanted something. He let it happen. Because that's what you do when you love someone. Stephen was Katie's cousin, or that's how she introduced him. Tall, smug, always wearing a suit even when there was nowhere to go. He'd lost his apartment, she said, just for a while. Just until he found something else. Marvin didn't argue. He let Stephen crash on the couch, eat his food, use his car. Stephen always called him big man in a half-joking tone, clapped him on the back, took over the TV. Marvin smiled through it. And then there was Marianne. She had been Katie's best friend since college. Blonde, elegant, a master of subtle cruelty. She never raised her voice, never insulted him outright. But the way she looked at him with that soft, pitying smile made him feel smaller than anything she could have said. "Oh, Marvin, you're just too sweet for your own good," she'd told him once, reaching over to fix his collar like he was a child. They moved in, one after the other, filling his house with noise and perfume and laughter that didn't include him. Katie said it was temporary. Stephen promised to leave soon. Marianne said she'd help out where she could, but no one left. And Marvin, he never asked them to, because asking made it real. Because saying no meant admitting that they were using him. He still cooked dinner, still drove them to events, still bought Katie roses on Thursdays just because he knew she liked them. But somewhere in the middle of all that love, Marvin began to disappear. Katie started going out late without explanations. Stephen stopped pretending to look for jobs. Marianne took over the guest room like it had always been hers. And when Marvin finally asked Katie why she didn't answer her phone last night, she laughed. "Don't be paranoid," she said, pressing a kiss to his cheek. "You always overthink things," he apologized. Of course he did. That's who Marvin was, until the fire, until the night they left him inside and didn't come back. He remembered the sound of the lock clicking, remembered the smell of gas, remembered the faint scent of Katie's perfume in the hallway, the one she always wore when she was dressing up for someone else. He remembered seeing them through the window, Stephen standing with his arms crossed, Katie holding Marianne's hand, all three watching as smoke curled out of the windows, all three unmoved. He remembered screaming her name, her full name, Katie, but she didn't flinch. So when Marvin opened his eyes again in his bed, fully intact, 1 year before that moment, he didn't feel grateful. He felt cold, and clarity came with that coldness. He walked downstairs that morning and saw Katie humming in the kitchen. She turned, smiling. "Morning, baby." He stared at her for a moment, wondering if this was the version that loved him, or the one who had already started planning his end. "Morning," he said softly, sitting down. Stephen walked in 5 minutes later, wearing the same smirk Marvin remembered hating. "Yo, big man, coffee? Help yourself." And then Marianne, fresh from yoga, skin glowing, voice sugar-coated. "You look well rested," she said, touching his shoulder. Marvin smiled at all of them. The same smile he used to give when he didn't want to cause waves. The same smile that let them stay longer, eat more, take everything. But inside, something had shifted. They were still playing their parts, but this time, Marvin wasn't in their script. He'd already started changing the will. He'd already spoken to a lawyer. He'd already memorized every lie they told before the fire. They didn't know it yet, but the house they laughed in was already gone, because Marvin had returned with memories no one else had, and with a heart that no longer needed their approval. They loved the old Marvin, the one who lived for them, the one who died for them. This Marvin? He'd let them watch everything they built on his back crumble, brick by brick, and when they reached out for his help, this time, he'd let them burn. It started with the laughter. Quiet at first, just muffled echoes from the living room while Marvin cleaned up the dishes alone in the kitchen. They were watching something on the TV, a movie maybe, or one of those shows Marianne liked where people lived in penthouses and wore diamonds to breakfast. Katie laughed first, that soft, airy kind that she used to save for Marvin. Then Stephen's voice followed, low, amused, and Marianne's high-pitched giggle closed the loop. Three people sharing a private joke, a joke he wasn't part of. He paused at the sink, hands wet, the sponge slipping from his fingers. They'd left their plates on the table again, untouched. The steak was barely cut. Marvin had spent an hour cooking it to Katie's liking, medium rare, rosemary crust. Just how she used to request. He dried his hands and walked out to the living room. Stephen had his feet up on the glass table, shoes still on. Katie was curled next to him, too close. Marianne sat on the edge of the armrest, one hand on Stephen's shoulder as they all stared at the screen. "Hey," Marvin said quietly. "You guys didn't eat." Katie turned her head lazily. "Oh, we had burgers earlier. Sorry, we were starving. Didn't want to wait." He blinked. "You could have told me." "I didn't think you'd be upset over food," she said, laughing again, this time not at anything on the screen. Stephen didn't look away from the show. "You always take everything so personally, man," Marianne stretched. "Don't be so sensitive, Marvin. It's just dinner." He stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. It wasn't about the food. It wasn't even about the hours he'd spent cooking. It was the silence, the ease with which they dismissed him, like he wasn't in the room. Katie leaned into Stephen's side. "Anyway, we were just saying, you should really stop trying so hard. Just relax, enjoy things." "I'm fine," Marvin replied, walking back into the kitchen, but his voice cracked on the last word. The next morning, Katie's phone buzzed while she was in the shower. It was face up on the table. He wouldn't have looked except his name popped up on the lock screen in the middle of a message. "Stephen, he's not suspicious, right?" Marvin froze. The rest of the message preview was cut off. He stared at the screen, his heart pounding like a war drum. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He already knew. They were talking about him. They were planning something, just like before. In his past life, he had ignored the signs, the late nights, the closed doors, the lies wrapped in laughter. He had blamed himself for being paranoid. But now he had confirmation in 5 words and a blinking notification. That same night, Marianne caught him on the staircase. "Hey," she said casually, "don't mention that text to Katie. It's a surprise thing. You know, Stephen likes to make plans without her knowing." He stared at her. She didn't flinch. "Right," he said after a moment. "Sure." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Good." Later, he overheard Stephen on the phone in the garage. "Yeah, it'll be clean, no trace. He'll never see it coming." The voice dropped. "No, he doesn't suspect a thing. Trust me." Marvin to soft. Steven laughed as he closed the trunk of Marvin's car. Marvin stood at the top of the stairs, gripping the banister. That was when he stopped doubting. It wasn't just manipulation. It was premeditation. He went to the bathroom and stared at himself in the mirror. There were no visible scars, no burns, but the man who looked back at him didn't smile anymore. He didn't blink away the pain or try to justify it. He just listened, planned, waited. The next day, Katie accidentally left her email open on the shared laptop. He didn't mean to snoop, but his fingers moved before he could stop them. It was their messages between her and Marianne, discussing financial documents, title deeds, his bank info. Katie, once the paperwork's settled, I'll distract him. Get him out of the house. Marianne, are you sure he won't contest anything? Katie, he won't even know. He trusts me. They were moving his assets behind his back, just like last time. He felt his stomach twist. He wanted to throw the laptop, to confront her, to scream, but he did none of those things. Instead, he backed up the emails, saved everything, every message, every file. When Katie came back into the room, towel wrapped around her hair, she leaned down and kissed his forehead. Doing anything interesting? She asked. He smiled. Just paying some bills. She laughed and walked away. He watched her leave, and in that moment, Marvin knew love was never real. Not with Katie, not with any of them. What they loved was his silence, his compliance, his willingness to give without limits. But now they had mistaken his quiet for weakness, and that was their biggest mistake, because Marvin wasn't just planning to leave, he was planning to take everything with him. Marvin stood at the center of his own house and felt like a stranger. The walls he painted, the photos he once smiled for, none of them offered comfort now. Every corner echoed with laughter. That didn't belong to him. The air felt heavy with secrets, and yet no one seemed to notice how quiet he had become. He couldn't sleep at night, not because he was scared, but because the silence in the dark reminded him of the fire, the kind that crackled softly at first, before devouring everything. And now, every creak of the floorboards, every muffled whisper behind closed doors, carried that same rhythm, that same slow burn. He would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how he ever believed Katie loved him, how he ever thought her touch was warmth instead of manipulation. He remembered the softness in her voice when she asked if he'd pay her credit card bills, the way she smiled when he said yes, and how quickly that smile vanished when he once said no. He was starting to see everything clearly, every moment, every glance, every casual cruelty. The way Steven always placed a hand on Katie's back when they thought he wasn't looking. The way Marianne always brought up Marvin's past mistakes in casual conversation, laughing them off as jokes, but always loud enough for everyone to hear. It wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation. He began to question himself, not because he didn't see the truth, but because the truth hurt more than any lie. Was he ever really loved? Or was he just useful? The emotional whiplash tore him apart. One moment he'd remember Katie's arms around him on a rainy night, whispering that he made her feel safe. The next, he'd remember the smirk on her face, in the firelight, the indifference in her eyes while he screamed from inside. He began avoiding mirrors, not because he hated his reflection but because he didn't recognize it. The man staring back was hollow-eyed, quieter, stiller. There was a coldness in his gaze that hadn't been there before. And yet, beneath that coldness, something else. Resentment. It grew in him like a slow storm, never violent, but steady. He smiled at breakfast. He held the door for them. He asked how their days were, nodded, even laughed. But beneath it all, his mind never rested. Every kind gesture they offered now felt like an insult. Every thank you was a slap in the face. And yet, he still played his role perfectly, because they weren't the only ones who could lie. Sometimes, he would walk past the guest room door and hear them laughing. His name would slip between their giggles. He never stopped to listen longer. He didn't have to. He knew exactly what they were saying. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach. At times, he wanted to confront Katie. Just ask her why. Why pretend? Why hold his hand at the mall only to spend his money behind his back? But the words never came. Not because he lacked the courage, but because her answer didn't matter anymore. She would lie. And worse than that, she would lie with ease. What haunted Marvin most wasn't the betrayal, but how easy it was for them. That was the real pain. They had built a life on his generosity. And now they were tearing it down without a second thought. No guilt, no hesitation. He began feeling the weight of his own silence. The pressure of pretending everything was fine when his soul was cracking like glass. Every fake smile felt heavier than the last. Every forced word took more effort to speak. He often found himself staring at Katie while she slept, not with hatred but with disbelief. How did someone he trusted with his heart become the person he feared most? He couldn't decide what was worse, what she was doing now or what she would eventually do. The suspense killed him in slow, steady cuts. Would they try to sell the house before the fire again? Would they leave him behind once more? Or would they make it look like an accident this time? His heart raced when he touched the doorknobs at night, testing them quietly, making sure they weren't tampered with. He started setting small traps, tiny strips of tape across drawers, shoe positions, codes on his documents just to confirm his suspicions, and each time, the evidence mounted. They were moving against him. He felt powerless, but not broken, because beneath all the emotional wreckage, Marvin had one thing they didn't: memory. He had already lived through his worst ending. This time, he wasn't just hurt, he was sharpening his pain into something usable. He began meeting with lawyers in secret, moving his finances, shifting the legal ownership of his home, transferring stocks, all in silence. They still thought they were in control. They still thought Marvin was the man who would roll over, break down, beg them to stay. But each night, as he lay beneath his cold sheets, with the ceiling fan humming above, he repeated one truth in his mind like a prayer: this time, they'll lose everything, and when they do, they'll never see it coming. It happened on a Thursday morning, exactly 2 weeks before the anniversary of the fire. The sky was clear. The air carried no warning. Marvin had just returned from a quiet meeting with his lawyer, papers signed, sale finalized, funds redirected to a private account under a different name. Everything was in place. All that was left was to watch them fall. Then he opened the front door. Stephen was standing in the hallway, holding a thick envelope. The seal was already broken. Marvin blood turned cold. Stephen looked up at him. No grin. This time, no false charm. Just narrowed eyes and a jaw clenched tightly. What is this, Marvin? Marvin didn't move. Where did you get that? Stephen tossed the envelope onto the floor. It was under your mattress. Legal contracts? Property transfer agreements? Password backups? You really thought you were gonna blindside us? Double quotes so they were already one unit. No hesitation in the word. No apology. Marvin forced a calm breath, but inside everything trembled. I guess I underestimated you, Stephen said, stepping closer. You've been pretending, lying, acting like you're still the same pushover. I stopped being that man the day you left me in a burning room, Marvin said quietly. Stephen's smirk twisted into something darker. You don't get to play the victim when you've been scheming behind our backs. Marvin felt the tension shift. He was no longer just hiding his moves. Now, he was exposed. And worse, he didn't know how long they'd known. He turned to head upstairs, but before he reached the first step, Katie appeared. She stood at the top, holding his tablet, his private one, the one with his backup email, the hidden folder. Her eyes were red, but not from crying. You changed the deed, she said. You locked us out of everything. Why, Marvin? You left me to die, he answered without flinching. Her lip trembled. That never happened. It did. His voice cracked for the first time in days. I screamed your name while the walls collapsed. And you stood there, watching, all of you. Silence. Then Marianne's voice, smooth as always, cut through the hallway. You sound delusional. She stepped forward from behind Katie, phone in hand. You've been acting strange for weeks. I think it's time we talk about getting you some help. That was the twist. They weren't going to fight him. They were going to make him look insane. Stephen crossed his arms. Yeah, you've been paranoid, talking to yourself, disappearing for hours. I bet your lawyer would love to know you're mentally unstable, maybe even dangerous. Katie said nothing. She didn't have to. Her silence was worse than words. Marvin stared at them, the three people who once shared his home, now building a new fire, one that wouldn't scorch his body but burn his name, his sanity, his credibility. You're going to tell people I'm unwell, he said slowly. We're going to protect you, Marianne said with a smile. Even if you don't realize you need it. The walls felt tighter, the air thinner. They were flipping the script, painting themselves as the victims, painting him as the unstable threat. And if he fought back too loudly to suddenly, it would only confirm their story. He looked at Katie one last time. There was no guilt in her eyes, only calculation. That's when he understood. They didn't just want his house or his money, they wanted his story. They wanted to be the ones who tried their best to help Marvin through his breakdown, who stood by him when he spiraled. They wanted sympathy, applause. They wanted to erase what they did. Marvin didn't speak again. He just nodded slowly and smiled because they had made one critical mistake. They thought they'd caught him too early, but the house was already gone, and the match had already been lit. It was raining the night everything came undone, not the kind of soft rain that whispered on the windows. This was a storm, the kind that sounded like judgment. Thunder growled low in the distance as if it too had grown tired of silence, and the wind knocked branches against the glass like impatient fingers demanding the truth. Marvin stood in the middle of the living room, the very same room where they once laughed without him, where they had plotted around him. The papers were already in his hand. The ink had dried. The house wasn't his anymore, not legally, not emotionally. It belonged to the new buyer now, a silent investor who wouldn't arrive until the weekend. He had given them a deadline. Leave by Friday. They didn't. Instead, they stayed. Katie acted like she hadn't heard him. Stephen joked that eviction notices were for strangers, not family. Marianne merely raised an eyebrow, murmuring something about how nothing was final until she said it was. But tonight was Friday. And tonight, he wasn't asking anymore. He waited until midnight, when all the lights were off, when the rain drowned out everything else, and then he knocked on each of their doors. One by one, Stephen opened his first, eyes groggy. What? Marvin handed him a copy of the court order. You have 10 minutes, Stephen scoffed. You're bluffing. Katie appeared next, wrapped in one of Marvin's shirts like it still belonged to her. She looked at the paper in his hand, then at the suitcase by the front door. Is this real? She asked. It's done, Marvin replied, his voice flat. You knew it was coming. Marvin, please, Katie started, stepping closer. Let's just talk, okay? We can figure this out. He stared at her. You had a year to talk. Her lip trembled. She reached out to touch his arm, but he stepped back. You killed me once. I won't let you bury me again. Stephen stepped into the hall, phone in hand. You think this'll hold up? You've been unstable for weeks. I've got everything recorded. You'll look like a lunatic in court. Then call them, Marvin said. Call the cops. Call a judge. Call Marianne's therapist. See who believes the man with the clean title and a year's worth of evidence, screenshots, signatures, voice recordings. Stephen's face twitched. Marianne came down last, her heels echoing on the staircase. Calm as ever. You're being dramatic, she said coolly. Marvin looked at her. You once told me I was too sweet for my own good. I believed you. But the truth is, I was just too forgiving. She smirked. And now what? You think you've won? No, Marvin said, walking to the window and pulling back the curtain. A black car idled outside. The headlights lit up the driveway like a stage. Behind it, another one pulled in. Then a third. The buyers had arrived early. Stephen's eyes narrowed. Who are they? The people who bought the house, Marvin said. They'll be staying here tonight. You're kidding, Katie whispered. I told you, Marvin said, looking at her. Friday, midnight. You didn't listen. She stepped back like she had been struck. You're really doing this? I already did. The doorbell rang. Marvin didn't flinch. Stephen stormed toward the door. This is still our home. No, it's not. Stephen flung the door open and was met by two suited men holding clipboards and contracts. Behind them, a younger couple waited beneath an umbrella. The woman was pregnant, the man carrying boxes. We're here for the keys, one of the men said to Marvin. Come in, Marvin said. You're not letting them in. Stephen shouted. You can't, this is illegal. But the buyers were already stepping inside, surveying the space, discussing where to place their furniture. Katie stood motionless as the pregnant woman smiled at her kindly and offered a polite nod. Marianne watched it all unfold with stone-cold silence. Pack your things, Marvin said, turning to them. Or don't. Either way, you're leaving. Tonight? Katie's voice cracked. You used to love me. I did, Marvin said quietly. I would have given you everything. I did. But the night the fire started, I saw the truth. Her eyes filled with tears. That never happened. I watched you through the smoke. I saw you smile. She flinched like the words hit her. You let me die, Marvin said, his voice rising for the first time. And when I came back, all I wanted was to believe it was a mistake, that you were better, that I was wrong, but you proved me right, every single day. Steven stepped forward again. You think kicking us out makes you strong? It makes you pathetic. You had to sell your soul just to feel in control. No, Marvin said, stepping closer. I just finally stopped selling it to you. The lights flickered as thunder cracked outside. Then, for the first time, Marianne's voice broke its smooth rhythm. You think they're going to care about you, Marvin? Once the house is sold and we're gone, you'll be alone again. Marvin looked at her. Alone is better than surrounded by people who'd watch me burn. She stared at him, stunned. Behind them, the buyers were discussing where to hang the curtains. Life was already moving forward without them. Steven looked around one last time, then spat on the floor before walking past Marvin and out the door. Marianne followed without a word. Katie stood frozen. I don't have anywhere to go, she whispered. Marvin didn't speak. I thought I could fix it, she said. I thought you'd forgive me. I forgave you already, he replied. She looked at him, eyes hopeful for a second. That's why this time, Marvin continued, I'm not letting you hurt me again. And with that, she turned, picked up her bag, walked into the rain. Marvin stood in the doorway for a while, watching her figure disappear into the night. Then he shut the door. The new owners greeted him with warm smiles. You all right? The husband asked. Marvin nodded. More than I've been in a long time. They offered him a drink. He declined politely and took one last walk through the his hallway, feeling the weight lift with every step. It wasn't revenge. It was release. As he stepped outside, the storm had eased. The air smelled like fresh beginnings. He stood under the awning, letting the wind brush past his skin, the cold soaking through his sleeves. This time, he hadn't screamed, he hadn't begged, he hadn't burned. He had walked through the fire and made it out whole. Marvin stood at the edge of the garden, watching the lights from his former house fade into the dusk. A gentle wind rustled the trees, carrying with it the faint echo of voices, new voices. The couple who had bought the house were already settling in, their laughter spilling softly through the open windows. There was warmth in their joy, something real, something Marvin had forgotten how to feel. He didn't cry. He didn't smile. He just breathed. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he was truly breathing. His phone vibrated. A message from his lawyer. Transfer complete. Funds cleared. All assets secure. You're free. Free. Not just financially. Free from the chains of manipulated kindness. Free from the eyes that only looked when they needed. Free from the empty dinner conversations and the guilt-tripped favors. Free from a version of himself that believed love meant sacrifice no matter the cost. He turned, walking back to the black SUV waiting at the curb. Inside was his new apartment key, a clean lease, and the first page of a life they couldn't touch. He paused before getting in and looked up at the house one last time. Then his phone rang, unknown number. He almost declined it, but instinct whispered. Otherwise, he answered. Marvin? The voice cracked on the other end. Katie. He didn't speak. Please? I know I don't deserve to call you. I know what I did, but I need to talk to you. Still, he said nothing. I lost everything, she continued. Steven's gone. Marianne too. They turned on me the moment you kicked us out. They blamed me, said I ruined everything. I have nowhere to go. More silence. I never meant to hurt you, she whispered. But they convinced me you were holding us back. They said you'd never leave us, that we could use the money better, that it was just temporary. Was it temporary when you watched me die? Marvin asked. The line went dead silent. I remember everything, Katie. The flames, the door, your face. I begged, and you let go. I thought, she stammered. I thought you'd get out. But I didn't, he said, voice calm. And you walked away. She started crying. Real this time. I'm sorry, she whispered. If I could go back, you can't, he interrupted. There was a long pause. Then, I'm sleeping in my car. I've applied to shelters. If you could just help me this one time. That old part of him, the Marvin who forgave before the apology finished, stirred slightly, but it wasn't loud anymore, and it wasn't in control. No, Marvin said softly. You made your bed in my ashes. Now lie in them. He ended the call. Power didn't feel like shouting. Power didn't feel like revenge or even victory. It felt like peace, like choosing not to reopen a wound that had already been cauterized by betrayal. He got into the car and drove away, not fast, not in anger, just with finality. In the weeks that followed, the news spread fast across the campus and through the community. Rumors flew. Katie was broke. Stephen fled to another state with debts piling up. Marianne had been blacklisted after trying to scam a business grant using Marvin's former company registration. None of it surprised him. He didn't gloat. He didn't reply to the people who messaged him just to say they always knew something was off about them. He let them collapse on their own, the same way he had once collapsed, surrounded by fire, only now he was the one outside the house, watching. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the city, Marvin sat on the balcony of his new place, sipping coffee. The air smelled like jasmine and quiet. The chaos was behind him. The shadows were behind him. The lies, the manipulation, the betrayal, all behind him. A soft knock at his door broke his stillness. When he opened it, he was greeted by a courier holding a small package. For Marvin, the man said. There was no sender name. He signed and took the box inside, setting it on the table. For a long moment, he didn't touch it. Then finally, he opened it. Inside was a hand-woven scarf, charred at one edge. His fingers trembled not with fear, but memory. The scarf he had once made as a Christmas gift. The one he'd planned to give Katie, the day of the fire. He had kept it hidden in the hallway cabinet. No one should have known it existed, except her. Attached was a note. You were right about everything, and you deserved better. I hope someday you'll find someone who sees you the way I never did. He stared at the paper for a long while. Then, without a word, he folded the scarf, placed it back in the box, and walked to the fire escape. There was no grand speech and no revenge left to fulfill, just quiet. He tossed the box into the trash below, and walked back inside without ever looking down. The next morning, he met someone at the cafe down the block, a woman named Leona, soft-spoken, thoughtful. She didn't know his past, didn't know his scars. All she knew was that he gave up his seat for an elderly couple and smiled like he hadn't lost everything. She asked him if he was new to the neighborhood. I am, Marvin said, but I think I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. They talked for hours about books, art, the kind of music that makes you feel like you're floating. She laughed at his quiet jokes. He laughed too, not politely, but freely. That night, Marvin walked home under a sky full of stars, no weight on his shoulders. He didn't check his phone. He didn't look back. He didn't need to, because the past didn't own him anymore. And the fire had taken everything. But in the end, it gave him himself. Marvin wasn't the man they used anymore. He was the man they would never be able to touch again.